Liberal Perspective on Development. Contents: 6.1 Introduction, 6.2 Liberalizations as an Ideology, 6.3 Streams of Liberal Thought, 6.4 Evolution of Liberal State, 6.5 Addressing Social Inequality, 6.6 The Welfare State, 6.7 Emergence of Neoliberalism, 6.8 Criticism of the Liberal Perspective, 6.9 Conclusion, 6.10 Further Reading. Learning objectives: after going through this unit, you will be able to understand the concept of liberalization, explain the preconditions for the rise of the liberal state, and critically discuss the liberal perspectives and the emergence of neoliberalism. 6.1 Introduction. With roots in European Enlightenment, liberalism developed in the 19th century in the West. In the present day, liberalism is widely regarded as one of the most influential modern political ideologies. The term was first used by Spanish, French, and English writers with a negative connotation. It was aggressively used to refer to the people with radical or progressive opinion. It soon lost its negative meaning and became the respectable political label. Most of the people would now like to be called liberal, which implies to be open-minded, to be generous and tolerant, prepared to sacrifice self-interest for the public good, concerned to approach every issue from an impartial and rational standpoint, and not the least influenced by prejudice and superstition. Such people oppose authoritarian laws and practices that would put particular social groups in a situation of disadvantage. People with a liberal outlook support the right to free speech, the right to picket and protest, and the right of women, homosexuals, peasants, refugees, and the rights of all marginal communities. In this unit, we seek to understand the concept of development from the liberal perspective, beginning with the basic ideology of liberalism and the extent of power intervention of the state in terms of economic and political control over business and the role of the state in a liberal economy. We go on to develop a critique of the liberal perspective and emergence of neoliberalism. We conclude with the evolving a framework for comprehending the development from the liberal perspective. 6.2 Liberalism as an Ideology. Liberalism has provided a unique perspective on social, economic, and political development. It set out an ideology that has shaped history and in recent time has made a major comeback in the form of neoliberalism to influence the future course of human development. Human history over the past 200 years or so has been in a sense of one of struggle between supporters of economic liberalism committed to the principle of the self-regulating market and the defenders of society who have sought to regulate the way in which labor is engaged with capital, the exploitation of nature, and the money market. The struggle has proliferated in the political and ideological domains. Each of the two conflicting perspectives have come out with definite concepts, theories, and ideologies and techniques to realize the respective vision of society. The struggle over the virtues of a flexible labor market and the threats which they pose to livelihoods continues. The leading perspectives on development, namely the Marxist and liberal, differ on the interpretations of social inequality and the methods to secure justice for the victims of unequal economic, social, and political arrangements. The argument has built on the issue of the scope of market prices. More specifically, the question of relevance here is whether the market forces should be allowed a free rein or there should be a regulation on them. The difference is whether development should be reduced to growth in productivity and per capita income, or should it be perceived in a broader perspective in terms of empowering the common people and securing distributive justice for them. Ideologically, liberalism has stood out in opposition to the socialist ideals over the past 2 centuries. It offers us a distinctive vision of society about freedom and free competitions in the field of economic entrepreneurship and of the role of the state in the control of production and in the promotion of free citizenship. A political ideology, liberalism is opposed to any form of political absolutism, be it monarchy, feudalism, militarism, or communitarianism. It stands for a social and political atmosphere in which authoritarian demands are resisted and the fundamental rights of the individuals and groups, such as the right to private property, free exercise of religion, speech, and association, are promoted. The philosophical foundation of classical liberalism was shaped in the writings of David Hume, Jeremy Bentham, and John Stuart Mill. These thinkers constructed the social contract theory based on the idea that the human beings are guided by enlightened self-interest, rationality, and free choice, and the idea of free development of the individual self in a free atmosphere with minimum of state control. Liberalism was the guiding principle enshrined in the economic doctrine of laissez-faire, which means the free promotion of entrepreneurship in production and trade, and in the social and political doctrines of liberty and democracy. 6.3 Streams of liberal thought. The liberal school of thought in the economic, social, and political field is not monolithic. Rather, there is a divergent streams of liberal thoughts, particularly on the question of individual freedom vis-a-vis the state. Box 6.1 Major doctrines influencing liberalism. Liberalism never constituted a unified and consistent doctrine. It has rather been an amalgam of different doctrines, including the Rechtsstaat, the defense of individual freedom and basic right, the recognition of pluralism, representative government, the separation of powers, the limitation of the role of the state, rationalistic individualism, and capitalistic market economy. Some liberal but put more emphasis on economic freedom and allow greater government intervention in moral life. The political philosophy embedded in Thatcherism, Reaganism is taken as an example in this line, while others uphold the idea of minimum state intervention in all walks of life. The later theoretical position is often known as libertarianism. Libertarianism has its roots in the writings of the 17th century English political philosopher John Locke, who emphasized the priority of individual rights to life, liberty, and property, and the elimination of coercive intervention by the state, which is taken as the prime violator of liberty. Above all, individual liberty is an identifiable marker of conservative thought, the guiding ideology of the British conservatives and American liberal parties. American philosophers Robert Nozick, 1974, and the economist Friedrich Hayek are among the modern protagonists of liberalizationism in their respective field. Nozick argues in favor of reducing the role of the state to a mere protection agency for citizens. Hayek holds that the ideal economic and political arrangements and interpersonal relationships are modeled on market exchanges. The role of the government is reduced to maintaining order and providing public services that involves formidable initial capital services. The libertarian ideals have found strongest support in United States, wherein conservatism and neoliberalism are easily blended. In essence, libertarianism calls for human action, not guided by any form of determinism. Liberal beliefs often contradict those of the socialism and conservatism. Tom Page's radical liberalism, based on the idea of a minimum government involvement in the economy, is close to socialism, whereas the overriding concern of the liberals to uphold the rights of private property draws them close to the conservatism. The early liberalization of Paine and others was progressive because it aimed to liberate individuals from traditional political constraints. They wanted government to be confined, in John Locke's words, to the role of an umpire, which would impartially safeguard individual freedom and rights. It was thus believed that citizens would be offered maximum opportunity to shape their own future. Liberalism continues to be associated with the progressive social trends even after the erosion of power of the aristocracy. However, from the end 19th century, liberals began to encourage the growth of government initiatives. Liberals now argued that individual freedom was diminished by poverty and unemployment, which stemmed from the uncontrolled laissez-faire capitalism. Hence, the need for the government to assume a larger role in social affairs and in the elimination of economic constraints upon personal liberty. Liberals always believe that doing away with political and economical constraints on individual behavior would lead to moral improvement throughout society. Individual liberalization, according to this viewpoint, in the key to social progress, individuals who lead a free and independent existence are likely to acquire virtues such as self-reliance, prudence, tolerance, and respect for the rights of others. These virtues are often described as bourgeois since they are typically displayed by economically successful groups in capitalistic society. Liberalism has been allied with the progress of the capitalistic world. Its subscribers seeks to remove restraints upon the capacity of individuals to participate in economic competition. They have argued that the economic independence associated with capitalistic regimes also breed a sense of moral independence. Liberals, in this sense, can be said to favor a process of embourgeoisement in which everyone will be eventually adopt attitudes compatible with a competitive economy. The history of liberalism reveals a succession of strategies to extend rights which it is judged will secure the economic and moral independence of the individuals. The different versions of liberalism foresee a one-class society consisting of self-governing citizens. The liberal ideal of a community is where, despite inequalities of wealth, self-discipline and mutual respects are upheld. 6.4 Evolution of Liberal State. In the 19th century, commercial interests in England were specifically geared to limit the powers of the state and to establish parameters within which the business activity would remain more or less untrammeled. The state proposed corporations and started controlling the movement of the capital for the public interest. The liberal state at this stage was not a laissez-faire state but one in which interventionism was required to create or maintain the conditions for private accumulation of wealth. It also demanded the involvement of the bourgeois in the public sphere. The extension of capitalism tended to reduce earlier mercantilist notions of state economic activity and political control of trade. Instead, public actions on economic matters consisted largely on the construction and management of legal, fiscal, monetary, and financial framework for the autonomous self-regulating operations of the allocative mechanism constituted by the markets of land, capital, and labor. The liberal states thus played an important role both in the economy and in social life. Of suggest the accumulative state's role running during this period of expansion was to define the broadest parameters of economic activity, preserve discipline in order to increase production, adjust to macroeconomic conditions, provide direct subsidies to private industries, and to fight wars. Moreover, the new bourgeois in Britain were quick to turn to parliament to reform and unify the existing localized forms of social control which did not fit well with the requirement of an emerging capitalistic society. Notion of equality and civic rights, despite the thrust on individualism ingrained in liberalism, paved the way for increased demands and participation of the disadvantaged and the disenfranchised. Social and political demands from an increasingly large group of the population inevitably confronted business with the potential threat in political system where government power was gained by voting strength. In the final analysis, however, democratization did not come in the way of advancement of capitalist economy, but its helped integration of the forces, the working class in particular, which according to Marx, should have forced the disintegration of the capitalistic order. Throughout the 19th century, the extensions of formal liberal rights in conjunction with the deepening social disparities broadened the debate on the question of equality. In several European countries, the right to association and trade unionism were extended into the works class in order to broaden the base of rural social justice. Although amidst opposition from the proponents of the laissez-faire, the extensions of citizenship to the lower class was given to the special meaning that as citizens, the members of these classes were entitled to a certain standard and well-being in return from which they were only obliged to discharge the ordinary duties of citizenship. Such developments marked a move away from the radical individualism of the liberal state. The development of the modern, increasingly powerful state during the later part of the 19th century, however, had induced conflicting responses from businessmen on the extent to which the state should actively secure the basic of successful capital accumulations through increased economic interventionism in the market. At the beginning of the 20th century, the economy did not seem to be fully operating on the model enshrined in the paradigm of liberalism. Firms where larger production was concentrated, liability was more limited, and the functions of corporate ownership and management became a more distinctive, particularly as demands for protection of home and markets that were stimulated by the foreign competition increased. The First World War shaped capitalism in a way that differed considerably from the liberal design. In England, for example, by the end of the war, the state combined and controlled the railways, guaranteed profit margins, and had assumed a major role in insurance. It was also the largest employer and produced the major part of the national output. In the period between the two world wars, cooperation between the state and the business interest was the dominant guiding principle of social management. After the Second World War, there was a clear shift both in Europe and America towards the welfare state. 6.5 Addressing social inequalities. Liberal thinkers do not accept the inequality inherent in society, rather, it is treated as a socially constructed. Inequality is therefore liable to be addressed as and removed. Since individuals are born free and equal, ideally, the state ought to be run with the consent of those on whom its authority rests. The liberals, along with the conservatives, nurse a strong distaste for socialist egalitarianism. Both favor a system of free economic competitions in which individual talent and enterprises are appropriately rewarded. Rewards, according to them, should be equal because people strive with the same degree of skill and effort to provide for their material comforts. They dismiss the socialistic ideal that the individual should be rewarded on the basis of need of rather than merit as unjust. Neither the conservatives nor the liberals are prepared to sacrifice liberty for the sake of social equality. The liberal position of the question of inequality may be presented in the following words. The liberal society cannot be an egalitarian society since freedom includes the freedom to make headway or to fall back, and liberals cannot agree to resist the energetic in the interest of the leisurely. On the contrary, we should try to ensure equality of opportunity, accepting the implication that some who seize opportunity will go further and further than those who do not. However, modern liberals share the necessity of maintaining some redistributive justice with the socialists. They concede that the gross inequalities could impair the freedom of the people who are condemned to life of hardship and poverty. For this reason, they endorse a program of social welfare. They acknowledge that the welfare of the people is actually a form of liberty, inasmuch as it liberates men from social conditions which narrow their choices and thwart their self-development. Thus, according to them, some attempt by the government to create a more equal society by safeguard rather than undermine individuals' freedom. While addressing the question of inequality, the liberals seems to be in a dilemma since they want both individual freedom and some elements of state control to ensure distributive justice, which in turn is taken as a precondition to liberty. 6.6 The welfare state. The role of the state in a liberal economy assumed a new dimension after the wide circulation of the influential writing of the English economist John Maynard Keynes. Keynes criticized the liberal idea on the ground that an unregulated economy would tend to move towards full employment and thus would ensure social equilibrium or stability. Shifting from the laissez-faire argument of zero role for state, Keynes argued that the equilibrium would be established before reaching to the point, that is, a society can achieve full employment by stimulating aggregate demand with active state intervention. In case full employment results in inflation, the state should act to reduce uh, aggregate demand. Government intervention in both cases should be in terms of controlling tax policy, government expenditure, and the monetary policy, changes in the interest rates and the supply of credit. The Great Depression of 1930s ravaged the capitalist world, and in desperate attempt to come out of the depression, it searched for new ways of how the state power should be conceived and deployed. The Keynesian economics assigned an important role to the state and managing demand and securing the condition of mass consumption. The new consumption was just into practice by new welfare state. The establishment of this welfare state depend upon the achievement that followed years of struggle for balance of power between large scale corporate sectors, organized labor, and the state. Keynesianism dominated liberal economic thought and economic policies at least for the 3 decades after the Second World War. The economic policies of most Western states were guided by the urge to generate employment and to meet the basic needs of education, health, housing, civic amenities, and other by adhering to the disciplined tax regime. Development policies stemming from the Keynesianism helped in consolidation of Western capitalism, both internally and externally. Internally, the economic weather sections of society were integrated to the liberal social, economic, and political arrangement, while extremely the Western part capitalistic would succeed in consolidating its position, vice versa the socialist capitalistic would succeed in consolidating the position of vice versa the socialist bloc. In the second half of the 20th century, thus the role of the state in meeting the welfare needs of the common people in advanced industrial societies was increased as a well worked out policy of social stability. Reflection and action 6.1. In your opinion, why, what extent should the state intervene in the state and economic affairs of the individual? 6.7. Emergence of Neoliberalism. In the post-war period, even as the Western states are realizing the importance of welfare and element in public policy, there was a recognition of the need for slackening the role of the state in order to facilitate free movement of social and political of technology and capital. The most prominent neoliberals are libertarians, enthusiastic advocates of the right of the individual that are sometimes against those of the conservative state. The chief protagonists are Milton Friedman, Friedrich Hayek, Robert Nozick. Friedrich Hayek, for example, is known for his anti-Keynesian modernism. According to advocate laissez-faire economics, Hayek argued that the centralized economic planning threatens liberty and therefore creates conditions for freedom. Self-dom. He explains that collectivism is a threat to individual freedom. The ideals of classical liberalization based on the idea of laissez-faire reappeared in the 1980s in the form of liberalization or globalization of production, distribution, and consumption arrangements. Over the past couple of decades, there has been some retrenchment in state welfare in a range of Western societies, particularly after Reaganism in USA and Thatcherism in UK in the 1980s. With increasing privatization of welfare services and support for private provident fund, provident dependent on the ability to pay rather than upon need. Towards the end of the 20th century, much as in the 19th century, one of the major battle lines of politics has been between the apostles of economic liberalism and those who favor intervention to protect society. Lately, the proponents of protectionism have become more influential again. This is the substance of the so-called third way, which came to be much talked about at the end of the 1990s. It stands in the position that was once again occupied by socialists, and it has brought together newly elected left of center leader in Europe, Tony Blair in Britain, Lionel Jospin in France, Gerhard Schröder in Germany, and Clinton in the United States. The third way could be interpreted as a balancing act to take care of the backwash effects of a great leap forward of capitalism. Industrialization is a precondition of development, which is understood in terms of economic progress, end of traditional values, rise of rationality, removal of mass property, spread of liberty and citizenship. The social scientists are worried about the negative impact of the neoliberal phases of development. Castells argues that in the new era of capitalistic growth, the focus would shift from industrializations to the network of information and knowledge. In the 1998-99 World Bank report mentions that the differences is some important measures of knowledge creations are far greater between rich and poor countries than the difference in income. Certainly, the decline of manufacturing sector and the rise of service and knowledge-based sectors in industrialized countries will pose new questions for development and analytics and policy makers in future. Extending the critique of neoliberal development, catching comments that development is an awful process for Cohen and Shendon. Development means ameliorating the disordered faults of progress. Much of development efforts go into ameliorating the problems of poverty, environmental degradation, and social disorder. Development is often equated with the programs for the relief and welfare of poor communities or displaced populations. The international agencies monitoring globalization, the World Bank in particular, are now increasingly laying stress on this integration of poor communities into global system. Social scientists are engaged in suggesting means to achieve global integration. Chambers, for example, suggest a participative approach to facilitate the involvement of people in the developmental plans made for them and to empower them in the progress. Chambers has been largely responsible for the promoting what is now a large global network of movement concerned with participative rural appraisal or participative learning and action, including the idealistic precepts such as handing over the stick to poor communities to allow them to design and run their own development projects. In the Indian context, we see that processes like economic liberalization, democratic decentralization, and participatory development are being experimented at the same time. 6.8 Criticism of Liberal Perspective. C.B. Macpherson, 1966, has criticized liberalization on the ground that it promotes possessive individualism, meaning individuals with little social or collective concerns. The socialist critique of the liberal perspective is based on the interpretations of inequality and social justice. It has been argued that the economic order characterized by inequality would promote further inequality and social injustice, and in an atmosphere of free market competition. The criticism of classical liberalism also came from within the liberal circle. Keynes, for example, came out with a critique of classical liberalism, or Ricardo, Mill and Bentham, and proposed a state of welfareism for the protection of the working class's interest. Sociologists have critiqued the idea of the individual autonomous self as absurd. They have also rejected the possibility of neutral rule, which would guarantee the promotion of equal opportunities for all, a precondition of individual liberty. Historically, there has never been a free economy absolutely free of control of the state. Even now, when in the 1980s and 1990 and neoliberalization have made a strong comeback, pushing the idea of state welfareism to the back seat, there has been a renewed talk on the protection of the rights of the victims of neoliberal economics. The liberal approach has devised an elaborate arrangement of labor control which entitles some mix of repressions, habitation, co-option and cooperation, all of which have to be organized not only within the workplace but throughout society at large, and is supported by the formation of dominant ideologies. The liberal approach that consolidated capitalism worldwide has passed through regimes of accumulation, to borrow Boyer's phrase. According to Boyer, the regimes of accumulation designates the set of regularities that ensure the general and relative coherent progress of capital accumulation, that is, which all allow for the resolution of or postponement of distortions and disequilibria to which the process continually gives rise. A regime of accumulation, Lippius writes, describes the stabilization over a long period of allocation of the net production between the transformation of conditions of both the conditions of reproduction and wage earners. A regime of accumulation thus implies the coordination of the activities of all sorts of social agents, or in other words, institutionalization, in the form of norms, habits, laws, regulating networks, and so on that ensure unity of the process. This body of interiorized rules and social processes is what is called the mode of regulation, and the liberal approach has thus been accompanied by an elaborate arrangement for legitimizing and reproduction of economy, embedded in a legal and social arrangement that facilitated reproduction of the self-regulated economy or the liberal economy. The triumph of the free market economy was possible not by cutting the state down to size, but in the elaborate social, cultural, and political arrangements under the patronage of states and an elaborate arrangement of management of the labor force. Hollingsworth and Boyer have aptly referred to this mechanism as social system of production. Antonio Gramsci's idea of hegemony and Foucault's idea of biopower can be used to construct a critique of liberalism. Box number 6.2, Hegemony. Hegemony means leadership, authority to or dominance established by one state or social group over others. It involves exercise of power or force by the dominating state or social group to establish itself or its ideology, which is met with the resistance and repression by those on whom these are being established. In the past 2 centuries, liberalism turned out to be the hegemonic ideology of Western capitalism. Without sacrificing corporate interest, the Western states have gone for more and more democratization and political participations of the downtrodden and marginalized in order to integrate them into the capitalistic social order. Gramsci and Althusser would suggest that the Western state worked in the social and cultural fields for the ideological integration of the class force. In a critique of the functioning of the modern liberal state, Michael Foucault has argued that to govern would now mean to cultivate, facilitate, and work through the diverse processes that were to be found in this domain exterior to the institution of government. One key domain in which these processes are constituted is biopolitics. Biopolitics refers to the politics concerning the administration of life, particularly as it appears at the level of populations. Biopolitics must be then also concern the social, cultural, environmental, economical, and geographic conditions under which human live, procreate, become ill, maintain health, or become healthy and die. Foucault has charted out the history of the transition of the mechanism of governance from governance through absolute power to governance through economic management, and by granting more and more autonomy to people. Biopolitics then first meet quite distinct form of political rationality and knowledge concerned with the roles of commerce in civil society. The Foucault's assignment, the classical English political economy, is in the first quarter of the 19th century amid optimization of the life of the population. Thomas Malthus, for example, discovered the relation between the process that impel the growth of population and those natural ones that provide subsistence for the increasing quantity of human life, the linkages between scarcity and necessity. The bioeconomic reality discovered and enshrined in the work of English political economists of the early 18th century helped generate new norms of government in order to optimize the life of the population. The new norms entitled government through the economic realities and commercial society and the market. They also entitled a concern to govern efficiently to limit the waste and restrict cost, a concern with that Benjamin Franklin called frugal government. According to Foucault, liberalization may be understood as a critique of excessive government. It should be approached, however, not only as a critique of earlier forms of government, but such as police and reason of state, but of existing a potential form of biopolitical government. Liberalization thus critiques other possible forms that the government of the process of the life might have. Government of the process of life might take. According to Foucault, liberalism retain in concern with security and advances a novel conception of the objective of government as setting in place mechanism of security whose function is to ensure the security of those natural phenomena, economic process, and the intrinsic process of population. Foucault suggests that the liberty has been used as a condition of economic and biological security of the citizens by the liberal state, while liberalism would adopt a legal and uh, parliamentary framework. This is less due to an affinity with juridical thought than because of its of laws generality and exclusion of the particular and exceptional, and because through the parliamentary system. Liberalism permits the participation of the governed in liberal government. Indeed, Foucault seems to suggest that liberalism has more affinity with the norms than with the law. This is because it constantly seeks a norm of good government in the changing balance between the governing too much and governing too little, and second, it employs mechanisms that strive to stabilize and normalize subjects in such a way that they exercise freedom in a responsible and disciplined manner. Liberalism thus participates in and fosters the society of normalization in its emphasis on the formation of the responsible exercise of freedom as a necessity to the security of autonomous process of economy, society, and population. Liberalism multiplies and ramifies what Foucault calls dividing particles, that is, particles in which the subject is either divided inside himself or divided for others. Moreover, the history of liberalization show how a range of liberal techniques can be applied to those individuals and populations who are deemed capable of improvement and of obtaining self-government, for women and children to certain classes of criminals and paupers. Foucault account of liberal government formation suggests a complex articulation of the issues of biopolitics and sovereignty. It is an articulation of elements of the shepherd folk game concern in its modern form to optimize the identities of the life of the population and normalize the identities of individual within and of the citizen game, in which the individual appears as an active and a responsible citizen within a self-governing political community and within commercial society. In this balancing act that the modern liberalization had thrived by mastering the mechanisms of disciplining and subjugation of citizens, although the main objective of ideology was to promote liberty. Nevertheless, while liberalism may try to make safe the biopolitical imperative of the optimization of the life by deploying the notion of rights and framework of law it has inherited from the forms of sovereign rule, it has shown itself permanently incapable of arresting the emergence of forms of knowledge that make the optimization of the life of others. Reflections and Action 6.2. What are the major limitations of the liberal perspective of development? 6.9 Conclusion. Liberalism as a perspective of development has to be understood in a broader framework in terms of its economic, political, and social meaning. The modern day political ideologies and economics and social policies primarily flow from liberal perspective. Historically, liberalism has been put into use for the unhindered growth of capitalistic economy and the capital social order. A close look at the genealogy of the liberal perspective of development would disentangle how the power relations, the legal system, and the social and cultural elements have been put to use for the expansion of the principles of the free market economy worldwide. Although there has been more and more democratization of and empowerment of common people in all countries, with the recognition of principle of equality, fundamental rights, and justice, the liberal state has, in the ultimate analysis, bailed out capitalism from periodic crises and restored it to a strong foundation. The Marxist paradigm of a base superstructure relationship is much reinstated. The idea of pure laissez-faire has never been practicable because of capital has always needed some kind of support from the state. The state has historically worked out strategies to facilitate the uninterrupted growth of capital and has successfully accommodated the labor force into the capitalistic social order by working in the ideologically, social, and cultural spheres. In the past couple of decades, liberalism has made a strong comeback in the shape of neoliberalization, and it is now out to operate on a wider global scale. The hegemonic neoliberalism is drawing new ideas and new movements for the protection of the working class and the other victims. The phenomenon of globalization and its social, culture, and political implications thus have to be examined at global scale. Although classical liberalization was shaped in the writing of economic theory, it is slowly dispersed into of social, political, etc. streams of thinking as well. The present unit depicts liberalism as it exists in different streams of thinking. It examines the evolutions of liberal state as well as the different issues such as inequality, role of state, etc., as addressed by liberalists. Also, we made an attempt to examine the neoliberal ideas and how it is different from liberal views. Finally, a critical appraisal of liberal theories is conducted. 10 further reading. Doctrines of Development. Another one is Michael Foucault, A Man in Danger, a handbook of sociology. Another one is J. Torfing, New Theories of Discourse. This is the end of Unit 6 on Sociology of Development. Thank you very much.